People who read the terms and conditions. What did you find that stopped you from accepting? Story 1. The calculator app that needed my location. Story 2 was going to get the Amazon Visa card. When I was reading the terms, I discovered that if you are late on just one payment, your interest jumps to 30% forever. They do a good job sucking you in with $50 off your first purchase. They will eventually get that $50 back from most people. Story 3. I applied for a credit card through a bank I was using. They approved the card and gave me a few pages to sign, one line of which read, "I have been given the terms and conditions booklet," or something similar. I had not been given the booklet, so I asked for it. The banker said something like, "We don't have those in the bank, but you can read them online." After a bit of back and forth about it, it was clear I was not going to get the booklet. I left without a credit card. Story 4. The only two ways to escape student loans in the US are through full payment or no longer being alive, which is explicitly stated in the terms and conditions. Bankruptcy, serious injury, and chronic joblessness won't stop these creditors from getting their goods. Didn't stop me from signing it, but man, was it depressing. Story 5. Almost bought a house once, until I read the Homeowners Association agreement. I laughed and walked away. Story 6. My company, a very large cell phone provider in Canada that likes green, tried to send a form to the store stating that we agreed we had to sell 3 contracted phones a month per employee or face write-ups and eventual termination. We said no, that's unfair. That has literally never been done at this location ever. Just 3 phones total is an achievement. The regional manager said, "You have to sign it." And this guy at work, he's a bit much sometimes, but he can be awesome. Looks him right in the eye and says something along the lines of, "You can try to come hold my hand and force me, but I bet you don't know my signature, so no, I don't have to." Story 7. I used to work for a small startup company and we were trying to get Dell as a client for some stuff. They wanted a terms and conditions and they kept being a pain in the neck over it. So my boss, the owner, had me copy exactly what the Dell TNC on their driver installer and send it to them. They refused, and line item vetoed the F out of it. Right up until on a conference call, my boss laid out that it was their TNC. I laughed really too hard at the ums and ahs on the other end of the call. Story 8. Absolutely. Quickly reading the TNCs is something I learned to do as a former lawyer. You learn to do that after having to deal with so many TNC related problems with clients. Most of the times that I've refused something, it's been because 1. The company has been overly expensive with its rights related to my information, or 2. The company has been overly aggressive in disclaiming any liability for any kind of action, whether knowing or unknowing, negligent, reckless, purposeful, or malicious. Those terms get me to nope the F out of things pretty quickly. Often I'll ask for a pen and scratch those terms out. Once a company accepted the new contract, most times they won't accept it. Story 9. I frequently refuse ID checks from companies that call me and ask me for my details to commence whatever nonsense they're on about. I know it sounds common sense, but from my experience, most people trust, and they usually have no reason not to. What amazes me is there is no legitimate system for companies to prove who they are to me. Story 10. I was looking for ways to make some extra money from home and I found some highly recommended sites here on Reddit. All I had to do was watch ads and then fill out a survey. It really didn't sound that bad, and I like to consider myself a fairly intelligent person. I was like, This is just too good to be true. Sure enough, in the terms and conditions was all sorts of spyware you had to install, where they openly admit they give third-party remote access to your computer and its contents. And worse, they also say by agreeing they void all liability. Not to mention, of course, they share your personal information, name, mailing address, with whoever wants it, and your telephone number. So you might be able to do this and get paid for it, but I don't think it would be worth the few dollars per hour they were offering to basically give myself to some kind of evil capitalist NSA. Story 11. People who read the terms and conditions. All of those three poor guys are still busy reading. Story 12. Something funny you see in terms and conditions form before doing something minorly dangerous usually has a sentence. We cannot be sued for injury, loss of limb, loss of life, or loss of property. You always see the potential catastrophe greaten as you read that sentence. Yet it always ends with loss of property, as if that's the worst that could happen. Story 13. Somewhat related. A land developer was interested in building a residential tower across the street from our house and was in the process of acquiring the necessary land and making zoning changes to allow it. They brought all of the people who lived on my block into a meeting to talk about it and show us their design, which still hadn't been released to the media. The meeting went fairly well, and everyone seemed to be okay with the design. Just as we're wrapping up, she pulls out a stack of NDA forms and tells us we have to sign them. I and my next door neighbor laughed in her face. You can't show someone confidential information and then tell them they have to agree not to share it. Well, I guess you can, but the other party has no motivation or requirement to agree to it. Story 14. I should have read through the full TNC for Just Fab, an online shoe company. Buried in it says you will be charged every month, whether or not you order any shoes unless you go online and opt out for that month between the 1st and the 5th. This is not clear at all anywhere else on the site. I see it kind of stated here, which I would have read at the time. I read everything but the T and M before I signed, if I remember correctly, but either it didn't exist before or it didn't make as much sense as it does now. Needless to say, I was pretty angry. Story 15. The license for iTunes and possibly other Apple products states that you agree to not use the product to develop nuclear destruction devices. That put me on my heels, but then I figured, hey, if I am violating international law to make this jerry-rigged SADM, what difference is a little software license going to make? Story 16. I was signing the paperwork for my first mortgage. So glad I did read every word because in the paperwork, they had the wrong interest rate and they had tried to sign me up for a closed fixed rate plan when I wanted an open variable rate. They tried to pressure me into signing it, saying that they would change it later and send me updated paperwork. Oh no, not a chance was I signing that. I made them draw up new paperwork while their lawyer and mine, luckily mine was a flat fee, not hourly, were waiting. Story 17. A local fracking company offered me some money and a royalty if I signed off on letting them frack under my neighborhood from a drilling site a couple of miles away. The lease terms they proposed basically said it's not their fault if my house falls into a giant sinkhole of their creation, nor if any of a dozen other problems arise. I tore it up. A year later, they sent me another one, offering twice as much upfront pay and a few percent more. Still no, they'll probably do it anyway, as the neighbors will likely sign up. But this way I haven't waived their liability. Story 18. I might have discovered a hidden superpower, or I might just do this too often. I can scroll through the terms and conditions of an application I'm installing far too fast to actually read it. But I seem to have learned the pattern or layout of the text where it tells you that it's also going to install some horrible spyware. I spot it and either untick the relevant boxes or cancel my way out of there. Impressed, eh? Story 19. Read through a finance company's TNCs when making a purchase for a new TV. They would sell off my private details to third parties of their choice. Yup, cross that one out. Story 20. When I checked into the hospital, they asked me to sign a form saying anything extracted from my body would immediately become property of the hospital. I was there to have a baby. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and activate the bell button to receive notifications to my latest videos.